Erling Haaland's Premier League career has got off with a bit of a bang. I know, this is the sort of cutting-edge analysis that you won't find anywhere else. Haaland has scored 15 goals in his first 9 Premier League games, including 3 hat-tricks. Haaland's most recent hat-trick, which came in the Manchester derby against Manchester United, made him the first player in Premier League history to score hat-tricks in 3 successive home games, and it also made him the fastest player in Premier League history to reach 3 hat-tricks. That would be impressive enough on its own, but it is the sheer gulf between Haaland and everyone else that makes that stat all the more remarkable. The next fastest player to 3 Premier League hat-tricks was Michael Owen, who reached that tally in 48 games, followed by Ruud van Nistelrooy, who did it in 59 games, and then Fernando Torres, who needed 64 appearances to reach that same milestone. Haaland did it in just 8 games. There is no precedent in English football, during the Premier League era at least, for the start that the Norwegian has made this season. I am still reasonably young-ish, age 26, but I've always been passionate about the history of the game, and I thought that it would be interesting to have a look back, after reading a recent tweet which posed this question, at whether there is any historical precedent for Erling Braut Haaland. I don't just mean someone scoring an outrageous number of goals. Loads of players have done that. Messi and Ronaldo, perhaps most notably and most recently, and the likes of Ferenc Puskás, Gerd Müller, and Jimmy Greaves before them. I don't even mean scoring an outrageous number of goals at a very young age. Ronaldo, Luis Nazario de Lima, Sergio Aguero, and even Haaland's own contemporary Kylian Mbappe have all done that as well. No, I mean, in a broader sense, as a footballer, has there ever been anything like Erling Braut Haaland in terms of his size, strength, speed, goals, and just all-round aura? And if so, who are they, what happened to them, and what might they tell us about Haaland himself? So that is the challenge that I came up with and set myself, and I found the whole thing far too much fun, exposing myself as an enormous nerd. But hopefully you all enjoy it, or at least find it half as interesting as I did. The most common word that I seem to hear people use about Erling Haaland at the moment is freak. Not as a pejorative, but as a compliment, given the sheer freakishness of his physical attributes and his goal-scoring prowess. There is certainly an element of otherworldliness about Haaland. He seems too good, too powerful, and too prolific, with some fans describing him as a cheat code. In that sense, the most obvious comparison with Haaland is perhaps the Brazilian Ronaldo. When Ronaldo first broke through, initially at Cruzeiro and with Brazil, and then at PSV and Barcelona, it was like he was an alien from another planet. He was the fastest player on the planet, both with and without the ball. His close control was better than anyone else's, even when he was running at full speed. His awareness was superb, and he showed absolutely no mercy in front of goal. Ronaldo scored 44 goals in 47 games for Cruzeiro at the ages of 16 and 17, at a time when Brazilian football was much more formidable than it is now. He struck 54 times in 57 games for PSV, at a time when Dutch football was also much stronger than it is today, aged 18 and 19, and then he hit his peak with FC Barcelona and Inter Milan before rupturing his kneecap tendons at the age of only 23. Ronaldo transferred for world record fees twice, breaking his own record at the age of 20, and he became the youngest ever recipient of the FIFA World Player of the Year award. Make no mistake, Ronaldo was much better at football than Haaland. The Brazilian could do just about anything with a ball at his feet. Aesthetically, he was one of the purest footballers ever to have graced the game, and his pace and power only served to round off what would have been a world-class centre-forward regardless. When Pep Guardiola was asked recently whether he sees something in Haaland that reminds him of Lionel Messi in terms of his goal scoring, he responded by saying that the difference between them is that Haaland needs all of his mates to do it, whilst Messi had the ability to do it all on his own. In that sense, Ronaldo was much more like Messi, in that he could pick up the ball inside of his own half, beat 4 or 5 opponents, and find the back of the net, which isn't something that Haaland can do. In fact, whilst Ronaldo pioneered a new breed of centre-forwards, alongside the likes of George Weah and Thierry Henry, who would drop deep to pick up the ball and instigate attacks rather than just finishing them off, Haaland is almost like a throwback to those pre-Ronaldo era old-school number 9s, a sort of goal-scoring troll who comes alive within the 6-yard box and can have 6 touches all game, but 3 of them are goals. The comparison also falls down, I think, aside from Ronaldo just being much better at football, on Ronaldo's own end, because whilst physically he was stunning, as fast as lightning, so agile, and hellishly strong, as my granddad used to put it, he had neither the size nor the presence of Haaland, and though his core strength was incredible, he couldn't, or at the very least didn't, tend to bulldoze through an absolutely monster defenders like Haaland does. Despite there being clear differences between them though, I still think that Ronaldo is as good of a starting point as you're likely to find, purely in terms of freakishness and the sense that what you were watching wasn't quite fair or of this world. I think that Ronaldo is the only player whose breakthrough, teenage years and early 20s have been more shocking than Haaland since probably Diego Maradona in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And even with Maradona, it was very different, at a time when football wasn't nearly as globalised, which meant that El Diego didn't become an overnight worldwide superstar or household name at 17, even when his otherworldly talent was already clear to everyone in Argentina. Interestingly, Ronaldo had scored 215 goals for club and country by the age of 23 when he ruptured his kneecap tendons, which is an absolutely absurd record. Haaland looks set to beat that record, already on 196 goals at the age of 22, though some of those goals have come in the 4th tier of Norwegian football, whilst Ronaldo only ever scored senior goals for top-flight super clubs at a time when fewer goals were scored overall than they are now. Ronaldo played 254 games during that time, giving him an average of 0.84 goals per game, whilst Haaland has played 236 games, giving him an average of 0.82 goals a game. So, if nothing else, they do have extraordinarily similar goal-scoring records. In terms of Haaland's size and physicality, a better comparison when it comes to phenomenal Brazilian centre-forwards might be Adriano. Remember him? Adriano made his Brazil debut at 18, during the same year that he made his club debut for Flamengo, and after hitting his peak during the mid-2000s, by which stage Ronaldo's fitness and injury problems were starting to cause him some real issues, Adriano was hailed as being Ronaldo's heir apparent. Unfortunately, it wouldn't turn out like that. As Adriano put it in 2021, when people ask what happened to Adriano, his response is that, "Brother, it is simple. I have a hole in my ankle and one in my soul," making reference to the Achilles injury that he suffered in 2011 and the death of his father in 2006. By the age of 28, when his second stint with Flamengo came to an end, Adriano's career was effectively finished. For at least 2 years though, specifically from 2003 to 2005, Adriano was perhaps the closest thing that we have seen to Haaland as a centre-forward. An absolute animal, he was not quite as tall as Haaland, at 6'2", but it was 6'2" of pure steel. He was rapid, brilliant on the ball, almost impossible to dispossess, and he was in possession of quite possibly the most ferocious left-footed pile driver that the world had ever seen. Is any of this sounding familiar? Adriano was never as prolific as Haaland, scoring 28 goals in 42 games for Inter Milan in his highest scoring season, though that was the 2004-05 season, at a time when Serie A defences were still notoriously tough to break down. And like Ronaldo, albeit not quite to the same extent, he was more gifted than Haaland with a ball at his feet, but it is about as good of a contemporary comparison, stylistically, as you are likely to find. Adriano adored football, but struggled with everything that came with it, whether that be the money, the media, or the fame. The fact that he was so good, nicknamed the Emperor, and built up as both Inter Milan and Brazil's great hopes, he found difficult to cope with, for someone to whom football had always been a vocation. Ironically, if Adriano had been just a fraction less spectacular and had merely been very good at football rather than a generational talent, he may well have enjoyed a more fruitful and successful career, unburdened by outrageous expectations and constant media scrutiny and obsession. Whilst you can never tell what is going on inside of someone's head, that doesn't seem to be a problem for Haaland, who is now reaching similar levels of fame and intrigue, albeit not quite as extreme in his homeland, given that Norway's football culture and expectation levels are very different to Brazil's. Whereas Adriano grew up in the favelas of one of Rio's poorest neighbourhoods and fell into stardom purely by accident of his extraordinary talent, totally unprepared and never truly comfortable with the pressures that came with it, Haaland was born into football and relative affluence as the son of a former Premier League and Norwegian international footballer. For his whole life, Haaland has been surrounded by football, and indeed, professional football. He joined his father's old club, Bern FK's academy, at the age of only 5. He made his first team debut at 15, and he has been part of Norway's international setup since the age of 14, when he scored 4 goals in only 4 games for the country's under-15 side. I'm not suggesting that anything has been easy for Haaland, far from it, or that he doesn't still feel pressure, just that he has been much better primed for stardom, extraordinary wealth, and media overreach than almost anyone else, let alone someone like Adriano. Both Ronaldo and Adriano obviously had horrible injury and fitness problems, which ultimately forced them into premature retirements. It may seem, just from watching Haaland in the Premier League, that he is half man, half machine, and practically indestructible. One Manchester United supporter even created a Change.org petition to get Haaland banned by the Football Association for being a robot. But despite his incredible athleticism and seemingly bionic powers, Haaland has actually had quite a lot of injuries for someone of his age. Very quick players often tend to have problems with recurring muscle injuries, just ask Michael Owen, and Haaland has already had more than a few. Of course, he has also played an awful lot of competitive men's football for someone of his age, which makes injuries much more probable, and his bravery, putting his body in where it hurts, the explosive nature of his play, and his sheer physicality is always likely to increase the chances of picking up bumps, bruises, and, occasionally, something more serious. Haaland had at least 9 separate injuries, only counting those that forced him to miss games, over a period of 2.5 years playing for Borussia Dortmund. None were particularly serious in of themselves, or enough to put anyone off signing him, the longest being a 6-week spell on the sidelines due to a muscle injury, in that case to his groin. In total, Haaland missed around 30 games through injury at Dortmund, which, given that he played 89, is not totally disastrous, but it is certainly substantial, especially for a player so young. It was those recurring, niggling, mostly muscle injuries, which saw Haaland spend roughly a quarter of his time at Dortmund out injured, and prevented him from ever challenging Robert Lewandowski for the Bundesliga Golden Boot. In fact, Haaland was never even in the top 2 highest scorers in a single Bundesliga season, finishing behind Lewandowski and Andre Silva in 2020-21, and then behind Lewandowski and Patrick Schick in the season just gone. It seems near certain that Haaland will win his first Golden Boot this season and exceed his career high of 27 league goals, already on 15 at the start of October. But even more importantly, and more reassuringly for Manchester City fans, is the fact that Pep Guardiola believes that Haaland's persistent injury problems are a thing of the past. Ahead of the Manchester derby, Guardiola commented that thanks to the work of Mario, referring there to Manchester City's first-team sports therapist, Mario Profundi, Haaland is now able to play games on a regular basis. Guardiola didn't exactly elaborate on just how that has been made possible or what methods Profundi has used, but whilst the proof of the pudding will be whether or not Haaland does continue to pick up niggling injuries, the fact that Pep hasn't really rested him all that much so far this season certainly suggests that he considers it to be true. It is also rather convenient for Manchester City, and for Haaland himself, that he has a month off with no World Cup midway through this season, and he could even be rested in the league from February or March onwards if it looks as though the Citizens already have their title wrapped up. Back on topic, I wanted to take a quick look at some of the other players with whom Haaland has been compared, as well as some of my own comparisons. One that I have seen quite often is Alan Shearer, which is a somewhat workable comparison, at least in terms of peak Shearer at Blackburn Rovers, when he was at his quickest and his most prolific. Often described as an old-school number 9, Shearer maybe had more strings to his bow in terms of holding the ball up, scoring goals from range, and his aerial prowess, which is an area where Haaland has made major improvements, but still isn't anywhere near as formidable as Shearer was in that department just yet. But the Englishman also wasn't anywhere near as quick as Haaland. He was 5 inches shorter than him, and he lacked the sheer freakishness and aura of Haaland, despite being the best out-and-out English number 9 of my lifetime at least. The likes of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Didier Drogba, and Ruud van Nistelrooy have all been compared to Haaland in terms of their size, physicality, and goal-scoring prowess. Though, it would be remiss of me not to point out, as someone inevitably will in the comments if I don't, that Didier Drogba only had 2 exceptionally prolific seasons at Chelsea. I actually think that Ibrahimovic is, again, or certainly was, a more gifted, creative, and intricate footballer than Haaland. But I don't think that he was as utterly terrifying as Haaland, even in his most prolific season at PSG, which was actually his last with the club. None of those comparisons quite fit for me, since Haaland is as tall as Ibrahimovic, as strong as Drogba, and as deadly as Van Nistelrooy within the 6-yard box. Better comparisons, I think, come in the form of Gabriel Batistuta and Christian Vieri. Neither were as tall nor quite as lightning quick as Haaland, but both were powerful, instinctive, and utterly devastating in front of goal. Batistuta had a similar sort of caged tiger that had just been released venom about him, in terms of his predatory instincts and the ferocious power and accuracy with which he would strike the ball at goal. Vieri, for a single season with Atletico Madrid, and at least a couple of seasons at Inter Milan, did have a similar, unstoppable nature about him, nicknamed Il Toro, or the Bull, due to his combination of pace, power, and single-mindedness when it came to scoring goals. In terms of his directness, laser-like focus on finding the back of the net, and the way in which he was just too powerful for opponents at his peak, Vieri is among the best parallels for Haaland in my eyes at least. After that, you do have to go back a little bit further in time. Gerd Müller had a similar ability to go into every game, with everyone expecting him to score, and rarely disappointing. But though he had an incredible burst of acceleration over a few yards, and fantastic heading technique, he was fairly short for a centre-forward, at 5'9", not the most athletic to look at, and he wasn't particularly quick, other than over really short distances. Eusebio, similarly, the other great forward of Muller's generation, along with Pelé of course, was about as prolific as Haaland has been at the start of this season, over a number of years at Benfica, and did possess those physical attributes. As fast as an Olympic sprinter, Eusebio had an absolute cannon of a right foot, but again, he was just 5'9" tall, despite his aerial prowess, and his genius was such that he tended to operate as a second striker, or even as a number 10, far more involved in games than Haaland, despite scoring an equally outrageous number of goals. Outside of centre-forwards, for completely different reasons, the late great Duncan Edwards is also an interesting comparison. Edwards, who tragically died at the age of only 21 in the Munich air disaster, had already won 18 caps for England and played 177 times for Manchester United at that age, widely tipped to become England's greatest player of all time. Sir Bobby Charlton described Edwards as the only footballer who ever made him feel inferior, and it is his physical prowess, the sheer fear that he struck into the hearts of opponents, and the way in which it didn't quite seem fair to have him on your team that I think make him a valid comparison for Haaland. The likes of Gunnar Nordal, Tommy Lawton, and John Charles are also interesting comparisons in terms of their size and abilities, and the way in which they forced world-class defenders to completely adapt their own games to try and deal with them. Such was the aura that surrounded them. But if we are going that far back, then you might as well make a case for Josef Bican, one of the most prolific goal scorers of all time, who was as quick as some Olympic sprinters of his day throughout much of his career, and averaged better than 2 goals a game at his most prolific. Even Haaland hasn't quite managed that just yet. That is just about it for today's video, but I would love to know if there are any comparisons, either past or present, that you think I might have missed. Certainly, in my lifetime at least, there has never been anyone quite like Haaland. Everything about him, even his bizarre form when he runs, is just odd, and obviously, he is absolutely unstoppable right now. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts, and your suggestions indeed down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter, or over on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.